Imagine a place where time itself once stopped. A small village, hidden in the folds of green valleys, where families went to bed one quiet night, and did not wake for 100 years. Not one body aged. Not one child grew. The fires burned out. The ovens went cold, yet the people simply slept. Travelers who stumbled upon it swore they saw them breathing. Mothers with arms wrapped around children. Bakers resting beside their bread. Shepherds frozen with whistles on their lips. 100 seasons passed over their rooftops, yet they dreamed on, untouched. And then, one day, their eyes began to open. There's a story, whispered in old books and remembered in broken songs, about a village that once fell asleep and did not wake for 100 years. It was not a story about a curse, nor about magic cast by witches or kings. It was, as the tale goes, simply a great and quiet pause in time, an entire community resting beneath the weight of silence. The village sat in a green valley where the mountains curved gently on both sides, as though protecting it. The houses were simple, stone walls, wooden roofs, little gardens with herbs and flowers. A narrow river passed through, glistening when the sun rose, cooling the air when summer became heavy. Life there was ordinary, almost painfully so. The people were not warriors, nor merchants of riches, nor keepers of royal secrets. They were farmers, bakers, shepherds, mothers, and children. Their days were filled with the clinking of tools, the rhythm of hooves on soil, and the soft chatter of neighbors exchanging bread or milk. But ordinary things, when stretched over centuries, sometimes become extraordinary. And so, this village, so small it was rarely marked on maps, was remembered not for what it built or conquered, but for what it forgot to do. It forgot to wake up. The last day before silence, the day before the long sleep, was much like any other. The baker rose early, stoking the oven before dawn, shaping loaves of bread with hands that had done the same motion for decades. Children ran barefoot across the dusty path, their laughter echoing like sparrows. The old shepherd, leaning on his stick, called his sheep with a whistle that carried across the valley. No one felt anything unusual in the air. No omen, no shadow, no trembling of the earth. Yet, some stories say that the sky was strangely calm that evening. The wind stilled, the river hushed. Even the crickets fell silent, as though holding their breath for what was to come. When night fell, lanterns glowed in windows. Families ate their meals slowly, tired from work but comforted by routine. They told small jokes, sang lullabies to the little ones, and drifted toward rest. And then sleep came. Sleep, deep and heavy, as though the valley itself exhaled and laid its head down. No rooster crowed at dawn. No footsteps stirred the earth the next morning. The ovens went cold, the fires burned out, and even the river seemed quieter, as though respecting the slumber. The passing of time. Seasons changed as they always did. Snow came and covered the rooftops. Flowers returned and grew wild in gardens left untended. Grass climbed the stone walls. Ivy crawled across windows. Years melted into decades. The world outside went on. Kings rose and fell. Cities expanded. Wars were fought. Trade routes opened. Invention sparked. But in the little valley, time seemed to fold in on itself. The people remained as they were, eyes closed, hearts steady, chests rising and falling with breath that no one could hear. Travelers passed the valleys sometimes. A hunter searching for game, a monk crossing the mountains, a wanderer looking for shelter. They spoke of it afterward in disbelief. There is a place where no one wakes. I saw them, sitting, sleeping, standing, as if carved in flesh and time. A village breathing, but not alive. Many thought it a lie. Some called it a cursed land, a warning to stay away. Others were curious, but too fearful to approach. So the village slept on. 100 years of quiet. 100 years is a long time to measure silence. The river carved new bends. Trees grew taller, leaning over rooftops as though trying to listen. Birds nested in chimneys. Wolves prowled at night through streets that no one walked. And still, the villagers dreamed. What did they dream of? No one knows. Some say they dreamed of endless harvests, others that they wandered through halls of memory, revisiting the same day again and again. Perhaps they dreamed of nothing at all. But here is the strange part. Not a single body withered. Not a single face aged. The children remained children. The old remained old. And the bread left on a table never molded. It was as though time had chosen to step aside, to let this valley keep its breath for a while. Century is a span that swallows memory. By the time the 100 years had passed, no one living remembered the little valley at all. Maps were redrawn, kingdoms collapsed, and new towns rose with names that rang louder. But stories have a way of surviving, even when facts do not. In taverns and monasteries, travelers whispered about the sleeping valley. Some swore it was a myth told to frighten children from wandering too far. Others insisted they had heard it from men who had seen it with their own eyes, though never the same men twice. One such tale reached the ears of a group of scholars. They were not warriors nor priests, but curious men and women who believed that the past always left traces. They traveled by horseback, carrying parchments, ink, and the stubborn patience of people who sought truth in forgotten corners. It was a spring morning when they found the valley unchanged. From a distance, it looked like any abandoned place. Stone houses softened by moss, paths half swallowed by grass, silence rolling like mist. But when the scholars stepped closer, they saw something that froze their steps. People, not statues, not skeletons, but people. A man sat on a doorstep, head bowed as if resting after work. A woman held a clay jug mid-motion, her eyes closed and calm. Children leaned against each other, their tiny chests rising faintly with breath. An old dog lay beside a hearth, its fur dusty but its body whole, as if time had never brushed against it. The scholars felt a shiver crawl down their spines. One whispered, "It is as if there are pause between two moments." None dared touch the sleepers at first. They only walked carefully through the village, listening to the silence that pressed against their ears. It was silence unlike any they had ever known. Thick, steady, unbroken, the kind that made one's own heartbeat sound loud. Fear and fascination. News spread quickly, carried by trembling voices. Some who heard it were frightened. Priests warned that it was a curse, a punishment from heaven. Soldiers said it must be a trick, perhaps a village poisoned by strange herbs or an enemy's spell. But others were fascinated. Artists painted the tale, imagining frozen villagers in golden light. Poets wrote of eternal dreamers who had escaped the cruelty of time. Merchants wondered if treasures lay hidden in a place untouched for a century. Within months, crowds began to gather at the valley's edge. Curious eyes, greedy hands, cautious feet. Yet none dared stay long within. The air there was too still. The sight of children who had not grown was too haunting. People came and left, whispering stories louder than truth. The sleeping village became legend. The first stirring. One evening, when the scholars returned for further study, they set up camp on a hill overlooking the rooftops. The sun dipped low, painting the valley in gold. As they watched, one of them gasped and pointed. A curtain moved. At first they thought it was a wind, but no breeze stirred the trees. They rushed closer and found a little house with ivy climbing its stones. Inside, a girl lay on a wooden bed, her hands folded across her chest. Her eyelids fluttered. It was not sudden, but gentle, as though she were waking from nothing more than an afternoon nap. Her lips parted in a soft breath. Her chest lifted with a sigh, and slowly, with the weight of the century pressing on her lashes, her eyes opened. The scholars stood in awe. They expected dust, decay, something fragile that would break at a touch. But the girl blinked at them, her gaze calm and clear, as though the 100 years had been only a moment. The world that waited. She sat up, looked around the room, and tilted her head in confusion. The scholars asked her name, but she spoke in an old tongue they barely recognized, words worn by time. Still, her voice was alive, soft but steady, echoing against the silence like a bell in a forgotten church. One by one, others began to stir. A man lifted his head from a table, rubbing his eyes. A child yawned and clutched her mother's dress. The baker, with flour still dusting his hands, stretched as though waking from a long, comfortable sleep. The village was waking. But here was the wonder. They did not know. They did not feel the years. To them, only a single night had passed. They looked at the scholars, confused at their strange clothes and unfamiliar words. The world outside had spun 100 times over, but the villagers believed it was still yesterday, the weight of a new world. When the villagers woke, it was as though dawn had finally returned after a single, unusually long night. They blinked in the morning light, stretched their limbs, and went about their routines with a kind of innocent certainty. The baker went straight to his oven, surprised that the fire had gone out and the dough had hardened. A shepherd whistled for sheep that were no longer there. Children tugged at their mother's sleeves, asking why the fields looked so wild, why the grass was so tall. To them, nothing had changed, yet everything had. The outsider's dilemma. The scholars and travelers who had witnessed the awakening did not know what to do. Should they tell the truth, that 100 years had passed? That the kings and queens these villagers once served were long gone? That the roads they remembered now led to cities brighter, louder, and harsher than they could imagine? One scholar whispered, "If we tell them, we shatter their world." Another replied, "If we do not, they will discover it soon enough." So, for a time, the outsiders said little. They watched as the villagers swept their thresholds, fetched water from the river, and spoke in a language that had grown strange over the century. They were alive, vibrant, and untouched by age. But they were, in truth, strangers to the world around them. The children of yesterday. Among the most haunting sights were the children. A boy of 7 laughed as he chased a wooden hoop down the lane, while a girl plucked flowers and braided them into her hair. Their parents scolded them lightly, unaware that these same children had been asleep when the grandparents of the scholars were still young. One traveler wrote in his journal, "To watch a child who has slept through the rise and fall of empires is to glimpse eternity. They know nothing of years. They belong neither to yesterday nor to today, but to something in between." The villagers smiled easily, but their smiles carried the innocence of people who did not yet know they were ghosts of time. Questions without answers. Soon, curiosity stirred among them. They began to notice the strangers' clothing, their accents, their strange tools, iron pens, wax papers, polished glass for seeing at a distance. "Where do you come from?" one elder asked, his voice kind but firm. "And why do you stare at us as though we are wonders in a fair?" The scholars hesitated. Finally, one answered gently, "We come from beyond the mountains, from a world that has changed much since you last opened your eyes." The elder frowned. "Last night?" Silence followed. The words felt heavy. How could one explain 100 years in a sentence? The burden of truth. In time, the truth had to be told. The villagers gathered in the square as the scholars spoke. They told of wars fought and ended, of new rulers, of maps redrawn, of inventions that made night as bright as day and carried voices across oceans. At first, the villagers laughed, thinking it a joke. "Do not play with us," the blacksmith said, shaking his head. "Yesterday I mended a plow. Tomorrow I will do the same. Do not speak of centuries." But the more they listened, the quieter they became. The faces of the scholars were sincere, their knowledge too vast to be lies. Slowly, the truth began to sink in like cold water. 100 years. Their parents, their friends in neighboring towns, the kings whose names they once spoke with loyalty, all gone. The world they remembered was dust. A village divided. The villagers reacted in different ways. Some wept openly, holding each other as though afraid they might vanish too. They mourned the families they would never see again, the seasons they had lost. Others grew angry. "You lie!" they shouted. "We will not believe this trick." They slammed their doors and clung to the rhythm of their old routines.